Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Frank Capra's film, It's a Wonderful Life. The reason we're going to talk about this is because I am, this coming December 2023, going to be performing in a live radio play of It's a Wonderful Life, written by Joe Landry. And so I figured I would watch the film. I've read the script for the show we're putting on, but I figured I'd watch the movie and make a video about the movie because that's the thing that everybody knows. I am also making a video about Landry's live radio play version that should be up next week. So let's talk It's a Wonderful Life. It's a classic, beloved Christmas movie. Filled me with rage. As I say in the video about Landry's version, I'm a Halloween man by instinct, and I don't really care for Christmas. It's not my shtick. I don't like or trust the sort of schmaltzy, happy ending of it. But I get why people like this film, and I get why people find it touching and heartwarming and all this stuff. But I can't see it that way. I'm too cynical about things, and I'm too critical of the Christmas ethos. So the basic storyline, for those of you who aren't familiar, we follow this guy named George Bailey, and the frame narrative is that his life is being reviewed by some angels because George Bailey wants to kill himself. And so most of the movie actually consists of George's life being watched by these angels, and we're seeing it with them. So George grows up in this small town of Bedford Falls, New York, based on Seneca Falls, New York, lovely town. He saves his brother from drowning as a kid, but his ear gets infected and he loses his hearing. After high school, he wants to travel Europe and then go to college, but he can't afford it, so he works in his father's building and loan company for 4 years to save up the money, at which point he's finally got enough cash to do it. But when he is about to leave, his dad dies. And so George stays on to sort out the business, so he gives up his trip to Europe. Then, on the day that he's supposed to leave for college, Mr. Potter, who's the villain, medal for him, he's the only one who doesn't have the Christmas spirit. Mr. Potter, who's the evil banker who controls a lot of the stuff in the town, is like, I move that we disband this building and loan. And the board votes to keep it open on the condition that George will run it. And George is like, no, I'm going to college. And they're like, what? And they're like, well, then we're going to shut it down. And George is like, fine, I'm not going to college. So he's given up his Europe trip. He's given up going to college. The plan now is that he is going to run the building and loan for 4 years until his brother Harry is done with college, at which point Harry will come back, take over the building and loan, and George can go to college. Harry gets back, and he's married, and his father-in-law is giving him a job. So George is stuck in the building and loan. George really, really just wants to leave. There are 2 things he wants to do in the world. He wants to travel Europe, and he wants to go to college so he can become an architect. Those are the only 2 things he wants for himself. Never gets them. He's continually giving up stuff for others. There's a run on the bank, presumably 1929, though the chronology is somewhat fuzzy in this film. But there's a run on the bank, and people come over to the building and loan to take out the money that they have loaned. Basically, the scheme seems to be people loan them money, and that money gets used to help build other people's houses, and then those people pay back the loans, so the original people get their loans back with interest. That seems to be the scheme, basically. But a bunch of people show up and they're like, I want all my money right now. And he's like, and George has to be like, that's not how this works. This isn't a bank. You can't just come and take money out. According to the contracts that you signed, you can withdraw your shares in the building and loan, and then in 6 months you can come and pick up your money. And they're like, yeah, well, we're not going to do that. We'll sell all our shares to Potter, who's paying 50 cents on the dollar. And so George ends up using the $2,000 that he and his new wife had saved up for their honeymoon. And he pays these people off. And basically, by using his own personal funds, he manages to keep the business afloat temporarily. Which means he doesn't get a honeymoon. Incidentally, he marries this girl, Mary, and it's a sort of weird schizophrenic courtship, where at times they're like, oh, we're having so much fun together. And at times George is just being a total dick to her for no apparent reason. So then they get married, naturally. It's a weird thing. It doesn't make that much sense to me. I think it's supposed to be romantic, but it seems just like a really toxic relationship to me in many ways. They do seem to genuinely love each other, but they also don't seem like they're actually necessarily good for each other. Not that there's anything particularly wrong with Mary, it's largely George who's actually a dick to a lot of people around him. He's kind of terrible to his kids. He's kind of terrible to his wife. He's not a very good guy. And yet he's the hero that we're all supposed to be rooting for. To be fair, I'll give him full credit. He has this very good speech when they want to shut down the building and loan about how the people who do most of the living and working and earning and whatnot in this community should be able to live and work and earn with 2 bedrooms and a bath. I think that's a very good speech. I think it's a very good ethos that people should be able to live comfortably. That should be a basic ethical standpoint that I think almost everybody should be okay with embracing. And yet a lot of people aren't. Potter is not. And again, like, on the one hand, I detest Potter because he stands for this sort of greedy, unregulated capitalism. On the other hand, he's the only one who never succumbs to the Christmas spirit, and I like that about him. So, all that stuff is going on. The building and loan is perpetually on the verge of bankruptcy. And then Uncle Billy, who's George's uncle who co-runs the building and loan, accidentally gives Potter an envelope with $8,000 that the building and loan needed to deposit in order to keep themselves afloat and in order to make sure the book's balanced. This is a problem. Potter doesn't give the $8,000 back because he has spent his entire life trying to destroy this building and loan, thus far unsuccessfully, and finally he's got the means to do it. So George is going to be arrested for financial fraud because this $8,000 is missing. And this is what precipitates him wanting to jump off the bridge, because he goes to Potter. He's like, I need a loan of $8,000. Potter's like, yeah, but you're not worth $8,000. George has an insurance policy for $15,000, but his equity is only $500. So if George was dead, the family would have the $15,000. They could give the $8,000 to the building and loan. No harm, no foul. But if he's only worth $500 alive, Potter's not going to give him the $8,000 to keep this business afloat. So George decides to kill himself. But the angels are watching over him. And so Clarence, who's an angel second class, meaning ain't got no wings, he comes down, he leaps into the river, so that George will come and save him rather than killing himself. And then Clarence is basically like, hey man, I'm your guardian angel. I'm going to convince you not to kill yourself. And George is like, yeah, well, you kind of suck. So how about you shut the fuck up and leave me alone? At which point Clarence is like, well, this is not going to be as easy as I thought. And George is like, I wish I was never born. And Clarence was like, done. Let's go see what the world is like when George Bailey was never born. Apparently, one difference is that it's not snowing that particular night because George Bailey is not alive. Not real clear how that happened, but there you go. But basically, the whole town is different. So Harry, George's brother, is dead. He broke through the ice and he drowned. Consequently, all of the people that he saved in World War II are also now dead because Harry was not around to save them. Mr. Gower, the druggist, who George worked for as a kid, went to prison and became an alcoholic because he accidentally poisoned somebody rather than sending the proper medicine, because George was not there to be like, hey man, don't put poison in those pills. The building and loan doesn't exist. All the people who had houses because of George Bailey don't have houses. They're all living in slums. The town has been renamed Pottersville. And basically it's like Back to the Future 2, where Biff is rich and powerful and has taken over the town and made it into this weird, like, shitty Las Vegas, Donald Trump wet dream type thing. Incidentally, Biff in Back to the Future, at least in Back to the Future 2, is based on Donald Trump. So that's a fun little tidbit for you. And in a way, I think that character is also based on Potter, or at least the town that Potter builds. Because again, it is like nightclubs, casinos, jazz clubs, strip clubs, bars, things like this. This is all that seems to be in this town. But apparently the most horrific thing. So the fact that Harry is dead, they're just they are like, whatever, that is what it is. The fact that people are out on the streets, that there's no good houses, that it's Pottersville rather than Bedford Falls, all that stuff is just like whatever. But the real horror, apparently, the thing that Clarence is like, I can't tell you, is what happened to Mary, George's wife. She's apparently suffered a fate worse than death, in that she's an unmarried librarian. And this is apparently the breaking point. This is the thing that is unacceptable to George. And he goes back and he's like, Clarence, he goes back to the bridge. He's like, Clarence, help me. I want to be alive again. And it starts snowing, signaling that we're back into regular reality. George is alive again. And he's like, yes, everything's wonderful. I'm going to prison and I'm super stoked about that because I'm actually alive. So, and then the whole town like rallies together and everybody's like, oh, George is in trouble? After decades, literal decades of just taking advantage of this dude and getting him to sacrifice and give up everything that he's ever wanted to do, yeah, I'll give him all my money. That way he won't go to jail. And that's the happy ending. It was like everybody pitches in together and they give George a ton of money. So on the one hand, I actually do like that ending. I think it is a happy ending. I think there's a pro-union message there. When workers come together, they can defeat the forces of capitalism, no matter how powerful those forces seem to be. And I think that's a good message. On the other hand, it's a Christmas message, so not as keen on it. But again, here's the thing that I think most bothers me about the movie. George is expected to just give up everything that he has wanted his whole life. He legitimately wants two things out of life: to go to Europe, to go to college and become an architect. Those are the only two things he wants, and he never gets them. He continually sacrifices. He continually gives up stuff for others, for the community. And while I think on some level that's a good ethos, it's also problematic because this is a continual cycle of him losing out. And yes, he gets a wife and kids. Yes, he's happy about that. But it's only once there is angelic intervention that he comes to accept this as this is the thing I should have wanted all along. And the reality is the problem with Clarence's logic, with his, I will show you how good your life was by showing you what things would be like if you weren't here. The problem with that logic is he doesn't do it. He does not show George, here's how good your life was. What he shows George is, here's how good everyone else's life was because you were in it. And that's not the same thing. And so the ethos ultimately becomes George should be happy to sacrifice what he wants, his own desires, things that are good for him personally. He should not only be willing to, but he should be happy to give up things for others, because that is what makes his life good. And it's that last step in the logic where things fall apart. Why does that make his life good? It's clear how that makes other people's lives better. It's not necessarily clear how that makes George's life better. If George did not give up going to Europe, becoming an architect, how do we know that he wouldn't be happier, that he wouldn't be better off? Sure, Bedford Falls as a town might be worse off, but that's not really George's responsibility. The town as a whole should be responsible for itself. The idea that George Bailey, and this is again one of those things where there's actually an anti-union element to this. George Bailey is the singular figure who keeps the town afloat in this argument. The town, as a collective, should be responsible to itself and for itself. And we know that they can be because at the end of the movie, they do this. They come together to achieve a common purpose. But throughout the majority of the movie, it seems like George, through the institution of the building and loan, has to force them to achieve a common purpose, which is not necessarily great.